Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristin, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast, where leadership meets entertainment. In this episode, we are going to discuss a nasty little thing called cancel culture, both in and out of the workplace. Ron, in our ultra politically divided and social media driven age, this topic couldn't be more appropriate. What made you choose cancel culture?
Well, before I say that, I hope everyone enjoys this podcast. It will probably be our last. We'll probably get canceled.
Nah.
Seriously, Kristin, this has been brewing for a long time for me. I've talked to managers and leaders who are being dictated by corporate political correctness, and they're forced to do things they don't really believe. I've talked to professors. I talked to one professor recently who was forced to put in pronouns and goes to meetings. Instead of being motivated that you're an educator, that you're doing great things, they go in and receive warnings in their meetings that you do not misgender students. You better honor what they want to be called. In other words, it's constant threats looming, and the students have basically taken over the campus. The professors do not feel in charge. Now, I'm not talking about all universities, of course, but a lot of the Ivy League universities, the professors, and by the way, the professor I talked to is very left-leaning and is afraid that their job might be taken away. And I am using the they pronoun because this person did not want their name mentioned. That's how afraid they are.
Wow.
So, and then there's a manager that I know very well who had a complaint filed for racism. And this individual, the only thing that this individual did was establish teams. And this one person did not want to work with another person and basically said, I refuse to work with that person. And the manager said, everyone has to work with whoever, you're on a team with. And that's what created the complaint that was filed. And the complaint was taken very seriously and went on for months and months and months.
Oh my gosh.
And this individual now, when it was all over, even though the manager was vindicated, the manager received warning after warning about retaliation. So there was nothing happened to the person who filed the complaint that was determined to be false, but the manager got warned about retaliation. So for me, leadership has always been about facts. It's been about policy, procedure, truth, courage. And I do believe that true leaders are being stifled, or they're being placed in positions where they either play along or they have to run along. And not to do a cliche, but the more I see it, it seems like we're becoming the United States of cancellation. And that's very sad to me. I know how much you love the country. I know you know how much I do. And I love leadership and I love helping develop people. But if people have handcuffs on them, there's only so much you can do to develop their leadership. So that's where we are.
Yeah, you're spot on. And our enemies love this, right? The enemies of the country. They love that we are so focused on the wrong things.
Yes.
That we are not ready to really go to battle with them, right? So we're very weak and we're focusing on these feelings. I proudly wear a shirt that says facts over feelings. And it's true because so many people have it twisted. So those unfamiliar with the term cancel culture, it's basically nearly touched every part of American public life. Politicians, celebrities, CEOs, athletes, media executives, even knitting influencers have gained or have been canceled. And I'll touch on that in a little bit. But cancel culture refers to the widespread practice of boycotting or withdrawing support for individuals or companies or public figures who have expressed what others feel is controversial or have engaged in objectionable behavior. And it also often involves public shaming on social media platforms. That's a huge, huge piece of it. Calls for boycotts and efforts to discredit or ostracize the individual or the entity in question. And Ron and I are going to share personal stories of being canceled. And I have other accounts of everyday people being canceled too, including that knitting influencer I referenced earlier. And yes, I'm talking about actual like knitting needles, that type of knitting. Ron, I want to hear about your experience of being canceled first.
Kristin, I never thought I'd ever discuss this with you because it involved you. I won't say that I got canceled, but I had always stayed away from politics, at least on a public forum, because I worked for the government. And where I worked, that was what you did. You did not discuss politics, or you didn't discuss religion and different things. There were boundaries. And for the most part, people honored those. You kind of knew who disagreed, but you still worked together.
Right.
So, as you know, I retired, and I felt really strongly, I'm not, I know people think I'm not that political. I am very factual. Like Kristin knows this. There's been a few times I don't go with either direction because I'm not sure about it. I try to get the facts, and I don't jump on bandwagons. I'm not into groupthink, and that's either way, either side.
Right.
So there's been several times that I have made both sides mad because I literally said, that's ridiculous. That nothing's going to happen. You're going to make a fool of yourself. And sure enough, nothing happened. So I'm not saying I know everything, but I try to get the facts before I jump. So I go on your show. You had a different show, and some things come up. It was going great. We were talking about interviewing. It was basically leadership. It's almost like our podcast.
Right.
And there was a few things come up, but because I was the chair of the Federal Law Enforcement Accreditation Board, I still, now my contacts are waning a little, but I was still very in tune with the upper echelon of the United States Border Patrol. So I spoke to someone, and it was off the record, but they told me of the atrocities happen at the border. And no one wants to hear this, but young girls are coming in, and they have been violated so badly.
Right.
And also there is sex trafficking. No one wants to hear about it, but that's why they're bringing a lot of the young girls. Now, that was then. Now we're hearing, of course we knew fentanyl was going to quadruple, and I said that on your show. Right. But the damage to the young girls and things. And here's the thing about me. This is why I don't take a side. Most of the people want to come to the border. I don't blame them. America's the greatest country in the world. I would probably be in the group. But the bottom line is you have to have borders. You have to have boundaries. And when we saw what started happening, no one, well, I did see some politicians go down when they claimed there was people in cages. But all of a sudden, when their person gets elected, all of a sudden, apparently the cages magically disappeared.
Right.
So, Kristin, I had firsthand knowledge of that stuff. So when the border came up, I spit out some facts, period.
And this was 2 years ago.
This was 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
And then we talked about energy. And I said then, and I stand by it, we are 20 or 25 years away from really understanding the electric cars or anything.
Right.
I said that then because I knew enough in the auto industry and watched enough to know that we were not ready. And I also knew what goes into making batteries, and the carbon footprint is extreme. But again, people didn't want to hear that.
Nope.
So I made that statement about the fact that we still needed to produce fossil fuels. And I stand by that. And a lot of people don't know this, but the reason our fuel prices have gone down is we used our reserve. We used to have this huge oil reserve, and we don't now. Yeah. So hopefully that's going to be built back. So that's the second thing that I said. And then I'm not going to go into this part, but during the campaign, there were people in government buildings already had pictures of the person they wanted to become president. That's not allowed. It's never been allowed.
Right.
But with that group of people and that going on, and by the way, again, I understand it. I understand why people were excited. I get all of that. but you got to have rules, and you can't just
Yeah.
allow rules not to apply. So I made
Yeah.
comments on those three things on your show.
Mm-hmm.
I know you had experienced, I know there's tons of other people, but I woke up, it wasn't extreme. Other people suffered way more than me, believe me. But I had uh, some people, especially two, who were big supporters of my book. They wrote,
Mm.
endorsed my book. I was the greatest leader ever. And I mean, the vitriol,
Wow.
when I began to read, it was in my LinkedIn message. One of them was, another one, I think, was in the Facebook DMs. But I mean, it was like, I was like, oh my, you want to talk about triggered? I mean, seriously, you would have thought I said, let's go throw some babies off some cliffs for fun. It was that bad. It
Yeah.
really was that bad. And I sit there and kind of, and I think I don't even know if you and I barely knew each other. I may have told you
Right.
later,
Right.
but I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe the level of hatred that was
Right.
expressed. And this person did attempt to cancel me and me going out and speaking. And
Wow.
this was a rarity, but it just so happens this person's boss was a friend of mine and is a very balanced individual. So
Mm.
after I kept seeing all these people from the same place in the country looking at, LinkedIn shows you who's looking at
Uh-huh.
your profile.
Yep.
So all of a sudden I'm getting like, I got off a plane. I was standing in an airport and I'm like, wow, I'm getting checked out a lot on LinkedIn. I look and it's all the same area. So I
Oh.
called the executive that I knew and I said, hey, I need to know what's going on. And this individual, we had a great conversation. It turns out, believe it or not, that company used my book as one of 3 books for the whole year as a
Oh,
reference.
wow.
So I just so happened to have someone who, just happened to understand and be balanced. So I never thought I'd ever
Thank
talk about
goodness.
that. But again, it's not what a lot of people go through, but it was definitely my first eye-opening experience
Yeah.
that I make those comments and all of a sudden I'm Satan's first cousin.
Right.
Anyway,
Yeah, I know. And it's in what you said was so mild. I mean, we're talking about electric vehicles and right. I mean, it's just
yeah.
common sense, factual information. And that's where we're at as a nation, unfortunately. I will share my piece of it. So I've been canceled a little more traditionally. Mine's mainly on social media because I do a lot of influencing in the political space on social media. But what a lot of people don't realize, they probably hear the term shadow ban or shadow banning and they don't quite understand what that means. You can be just flat out banned for something, and that's where your social media account is just shut down or you cannot do anything on it. You can't post or anything. But shadow banning is what is largely used by, say, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I've had it personally done to me dozens of times. And what they do is when you put something that they deem unsavory on the internet, they're going to shadow ban you. And that basically means that your post and your page will not be shown to any new followers or subscribers, and even your existing followers and subscribers, it won't be advertised to them. It won't show up in their feed like other content would. And the whole purpose of shadow banning is to discourage you, because you can go from an average of 50,000 views on a reel to where you're down to 1,200, right? And you'll notice that all your videos get 1,200, right? When at one point you were, having much larger numbers. The point for them is to make you so discouraged that you stop, right? And a lot of people do. And I'll be honest, I've had 3 TikTok accounts shadow banned. I haven't been on that platform in over a year, but that's where I got my start. And after they permanently shadow banned 3 accounts, I was done. And my YouTube account is shadow banned, meaning it's not growing whatsoever. I got up to 36,000 subscribers on there. And then in October of 2020, they shadow banned it because they didn't like what one of my guests said. And so ever since then, you just see they drop subscribers every month. But then on Instagram, I've put the most work in there, so I know how to play the algorithms a little better. So that's been my most successful platform. But it's all about discouraging you. It's a way to slap your hand if you use the wrong hashtags or phrases. And, so I've explained how it works. A few examples. And I was warned early on, if you put hashtag Donald Trump or Trump 2020 or Trump 2024, vaccine, COVID-19, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, election fraud. I mean, the list goes on. If you do any of those, you're going to get on the list. And that list gets you, in turn, shadow banned, which is a clear violation of our First Amendment, but nothing is done about it because these are private sectors, right? This is, YouTube and Meta and all of that. So it's a slippery slope that we're dealing with here.
Yeah. In all honesty, people don't like to hear this either, but if you study history, as soon as people begin to muzzle, when a government muzzles anyone, when you start to lose free speech, that is the beginning of the end. Mm-hmm. And I get it. I don't really like to hear people touting things that I disagree with. But in all honesty, that's what freedom of speech is. It's people speaking things you don't like, but you allowing it. Now, You can always speak back. You can always, as they used to say, change the channel. You don't have to listen. And that's the part that amazes me so much about social media. I do get it, but there are filters, and you can get less and less of the opposite side if you want that. And, but the difference now social media brought on a whole new change. We know that, but I'm saying the difference in the individuals that I've seen, it's almost like they're being trained to hate people who disagree with them. And the unfortunate part is a lot of the people who are expressing the hatred, and they are virtue signaling, for lack of a better term, it's usually like, I was watching this thing about the suppression of Black America, and I went, most of the people who were speaking were affluent white people. And I thought, I don't know if you're the right spokesperson. I'm not saying, that it doesn't need to go out there, but hey, let's talk to the people and find out what's going on.
Yeah.
When I have Hollywood or really elite people trying to tell me about daily life, I tune that out. But apparently we've lost the ability to tune out the things that bother us, and we allow it to affect our whole life. So it's happening everywhere. We do have to ask ourselves, as Kristin said, why is canceling going on at such a rate? And there is a term, we've used this one other time, conformity bias. And really what that means is peer pressure. I mean, you can call it what you want, but people are afraid, as I said in the beginning, they're afraid not to conform. So they do it even though they disagree with it. It's self-protection. And self-protection is something that's prevailed since the beginning of time. I don't want to do this, but I also have to make a living. I have to feed my family. And I get it. I don't judge people that harshly on that. I've not been in a situation, even though I told you about one thing, I had a couple of other things happen I'm not going to go into, but I was not worried about not eating. So I think there's some people that's their absolute livelihood. And that's why they're so nervous. They're so afraid to speak up.
Right. Yeah, it's happening everywhere. It makes me think of, my husband's law enforcement, and we talk about, especially at 2021, 2020, we talk a lot about the brown shirts, right, during the Nazis, right? And so, I'm just doing my job. So those were the police, and you probably can get a little more technical on this, but the brown shirts, that's what people do today. We watched, NYPD and all these other larger cities go in and arrest people that went somewhere when they weren't vaccinated, et cetera. And it was just, I'm just doing my job, right? But that at some point you have to look in the mirror and say, that's, to your point, I don't need to eat. I will go hungry before I sell my soul down the river and violate the Constitution or upend the oath that, I took this oath. I'm going to carry it out. Right. So a lot of people just say, just doing my job. And that's unacceptable.
No, that is unacceptable. I totally agree. I had to pass a case once. I've never told you this, Kristin. I had to pass a case that involved coal mining. And I grew up in a coal mining group, and the situation was sketchy at best. And I fortunately, when I called my chief, I said, I feel like I bring bias to this because I grew up in a coal mining community, and
Right.
this is something that I don't think it's wrong. I think it should have never been in federal court. Let me put it that way. I think it should have been a state misdemeanor. And
Yeah.
I was able, I don't know how or why, but they removed me from the case. I didn't work it. And that was a risk because I was prepared to make a strong stand on that. But I agree with you. All I was saying is I've never been in that position before. I want to believe I'll fight to the death, but it is what it is. Now,
you would, Ron. I know you. I know your heart. You would.
Here's a story about a successful young business executive who joined a protest against Chick-fil-A in 2012 after the president, CEO, spoke out against gay marriage. He filmed himself telling the drive-thru attendant, I don't know how you live with yourself and work here. I don't understand it. This is a horrible corporation with horrible values. He posted the exchange on YouTube and it went viral overnight. His employer received bomb and death threats and fired him for posting it. He lost $1 million of stock, stopped getting a salary, could no longer make his mortgage payment. They had to cash out their 401k and live on it, and ultimately let the house go. He found himself getting another job very difficult given the public nature of his departure, and contemplated suicide so his family could get his life insurance policy money. Things did eventually turn around for him, but the long-lasting effects of being canceled are all too real.
Yeah, this one's wild because when I was reading through that, my first question was, how did the public know where he worked? Because he posted this on YouTube. And understanding he's a business executive, it's unlikely he was wearing a name badge, right? So what probably happened was he had his full name out there, and they went on, just like they did with you, right? Go on to the LinkedIn page, track it back to the employer, and started from there. But, what I want to say to people, I think it's very important that folks separate the two, that you separate your business from your personal life. And I personally did not have where I worked listed on my Facebook, my Instagram, and I didn't talk about that on my public platforms. I actually used, when I was still employed by a bank, I used an alias, so they didn't even have my name, so that my bank didn't get any backlash based off of my views, that people locally probably had opposing views. So it's important that you're smart enough to think that way and protect yourself, and also protect your company. Do not share your industry, employer, and your title when you're trying to make a political statement.
And Kristin, kind of the ultimate stab is to dox. I know some people may not be familiar with that, but they dox people, which means they give their name, their address, and that's where death threats have gone to actual attempts to get to people. When I was federal law enforcement, I did all of those things, but also even if I had a trip to DC, I used to laugh because no matter where I went, if it was on vacation, I didn't post the pictures until I've been back at home for a while, and people would be going, have fun, be safe. And I'm thinking, I did, and I am.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That's smart.
Yeah.
No, that's smart. I mean, I even just think about, and this is obviously large scale, but Kim Kardashian, she would post things real time, and she did that, and she slipped up and ended up getting robbed at gunpoint, right? Yep. And she said, never again will I post real time. It's always going to be after the fact to protect myself and my family. So that's actually incredibly smart. And I actually do that, even though I'm just small potatoes. I do that now. I never post when I'm actually somewhere, right? It's always once I've gotten home safely, and then I can post wherever I was.
So that's why I can't ever find Kim Kardashian. Darn.
Yeah, she is a ghost in the wind. All right. So I talked about that knitting influencer getting canceled earlier, and I just have to share the story because it's so obscure. A female yarn making business owner wrote in her blog about her excitement for an upcoming trip to India. And she said, it was like, this is quoting her, it was like being offered a seat on a flight to Mars. She said, if I can go to India, I can do anything, I'm pretty sure. So that knitting community that followed her blog, they got their knickers in a bundle and said that she was othering. That's a new one for me, using othering language that fed into an imperialism mindset. And she was labeled racist, and the negative attention took a toll on her business. She was unable to attract business collaborators or new customers, and she was losing followers on social media. But I love this, though. You'll like this too, Ron. She embraced her experience and rebranded, and her name became Polarized Knits. And it poked fun at the political correctness and cancel culture with products named after terminology she had heard during this controversy, like gaslight, virtue signaling, othering, and wrongthink. She named her products that. And I just think that that's fabulous and the way to do it.
Yeah, that's othering. I think you've done that to me, but I'm not sure. I'm going to have to look that up.
You know what happened once at the bank? We had these vendors come in from England, and they did this thing when they were making tea. They tied it. It was like the way they tied it onto the mug was just something I hadn't seen before, right? And I said, that's how you people do that. And this coworker of mine was joking on the square, I think, but he goes, we prefer that you not use we or you people statements. And I was laughing so hard because I'm talking about a tea bag, literally. But anyhow, it was pretty humorous. So othering, maybe that is where that fell into.
We'll speak a little more about this, but one of the biggest surprises that I got with cancel culture was comedians. And anyone who thinks they can take comedians seriously, they've got problems.
Yeah.
Comedians are supposed to go against the grain and say things. There's the shock and awe factor. And that's what they do. They make the normal look abnormal. They make things that, is usually makes sense, make no sense. So that's what they do. And for people to get mad at comedians, and I will tell you, there is, and I follow some of them, there's a whole group of comedians that they are fighting back. And I'm telling you, they're going to full on. And did you mention Dave Chappelle in here?
No, I didn't, but
I was just going to say
and
that,
Ricky Gervais.
Yeah, Dave Chappelle, I remember thinking, because there was pressure going on to Netflix that they better cancel his series. And Netflix made a stand and they did not cancel Dave Chappelle. So he somehow, because he was big enough or had enough support, he overcame, and Netflix did air his special, and it's comedy. But here's my point. If Dave Chappelle offended me, and that's the world I live in, I am certainly not going to give him a click and watch his Netflix special. That's the part that I'm still mystified. And I know there's people listening. If you do feel that way, you're shaking your head like I don't get it. So maybe I don't. But I'm not going to sit around and just allow myself to be outraged every moment. And I'm going to speak to that at the end about how people they're going to look back on these days and go, my life was misery, and it was self-imposed misery.
Yeah, anyway. Exactly. I mean, it would be like someone like me who doesn't hold a high regard for Taylor Swift at all. It would be like me watching one of her specials, right? Yeah. And then just being, oh my gosh, I can't stand her the entire time, yet I'm supporting her by watching it and watching it. So yeah, you can't speak out both sides of your mouth.
It's so funny you said it. I had someone who despised Taylor Swift, but they talked about it all the time. And I said, I haven't bumped into her a single time this month. Anyway.
Yeah.
Another negative aspect of cancel culture is the mob mentality and the over amplification of outrage. When I watch some of these videos and people are protesting, wow, are they angry? And I don't know if they've taken acting class, improv, I'm not sure. But I can't imagine that they go home and they're still that angry. And social media platforms provide a breeding ground for groupthink and echo chambers, where people with similar opinions can easily band together and launch attacks on individuals they perceive as wrongdoers. This can result in an overreaction that far exceeds the original offense, leading to a cycle of negativity and divisiveness. And Kristin, people that have
Yeah.
read my book, and we named this podcast after the book,
Right.
I mentioned several incidents of bullying. And this was physical. Most of it was not just mental, but physical. There was some name calling, but I hate bullies. And if I saw people that I 100% agree with bullying someone that I disagree with, I'm going to take the person I disagree with side. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart.
Yeah.
You can disagree. I love debate. I think debate is healthy, but you're not going to attack someone. You're not going to go after their
Right.
family. I will
Right.
step in every time. And if we could just have that attitude, it's okay to have that visceral anger, but you got to have a limit. You have to have
Right.
a limit. I mean, if you go back to the Lincoln Douglas debates, I mean, they say, we didn't have the internet, but apparently they got out of control. They were ready to
Right.
fight. All that's good and healthy, but they didn't go after each other's family. They didn't try to destroy each other's job. There used to be some
Right.
decorum, and there were
Yeah.
boundaries, and we're losing it. We're
Exactly. I
losing
mean,
it.
just look at Adams and Jefferson despised each other. At least Adams strongly despised Jefferson. They were like fire and ice. Yet he ends up being his vice president, right, for 4 years. And then on the day of Jefferson's inauguration, Adams bounces. He's like, I couldn't get out of there fast enough. He wasn't there. They became best friends later in life and wrote each other hundreds of letters and ended up dying on the exact
Same day. It's crazy.
same day, the 50th anniversary of our nation. So it just shows you, to your point, you can completely disagree with somebody, but when their heart is in the right place, you're going to take their side over someone who's bullying them and make it right.
I'm going to tell you a funny story that you don't know or no one
Yeah.
knows, Kristin. I wrote my book, and I was talking about conflict resolution, and Hamilton and Burr, which, by the way, I had no idea would become such a popular thing, but Hamilton and Burr, and by the way, people think these are old men. These were young guys. Hamilton and Burr did not like each other. As you know, Hamilton wrote something and it leaked about Burr. And I mean, back then honor was everything. So he challenges him to a
Yeah.
duel. And in my book, I asked the question, where was Thomas Jefferson? Where was, I think, James Madison, or no, I said Johnson. And the first copy went out and there was a typo, a mistake in my book. So I had to redo some things and go out. I kid you not. I just happened to be reading, me in history. I read
Yeah.
something and it turns out that I think I had Johnson, whoever it was, hated Hamilton and was probably happy that he got shot. So I went back and researched and found out Madison was a contemporary of Hamilton. And I changed the name because if I did have any history scholars read the book, they'd be going, that guy's ignorant. This guy isn't going to step in. So I was able to rescue that. Because of that.
Nice job on that. Yeah.
So just
Crazy.
quickly, there's a story in my book, and I know we've been on here for a while, but I had an individual, because this is bullying and it's cancel culture, but it's a different reason. So there was there were two middle managers, and in my book, I called them M and M for fun, middle managers. So M and M both had conducted themselves in very unbecoming ways, and there's no way they were going to get promoted. So someone under them skipped over them and got a temporary executive position. Now, when you get a temporary executive position, there was a chance you could get the full-time position, but it's almost like you're on probation. They're watching to see how you do. I literally watched M&M. Everything this acting executive would do, M&M would undermine. They would tell the people, like if the executive said, we're going to have a staff meeting once a week, M&M would say, he's just doing that to micromanage us. Everything. And I listened to it. So they were absolutely against this individual, and this individual did not get the permanent position. I literally watched them undermine and undercut to the point there was no way that that executive was going to get the full-time position. It was
Wow.
bullying to a pretty high level. It was done covertly, but it was pretty
So
obvious.
bad.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That is a real shame when we witness something like that go down. I mean, cancel culture at work isn't normal. There should always be mechanisms in place to resolve conflicts. Now, to your point with your last story, things happen, right? Where humans at their worst behave that way. But when procedures are lacking or insufficient, people tend to take matters into their own hands, which eventually leads to a toxic and confrontational work environment. And I recall
Excuse me.
being, you all right over
Yep.
there?
All right.
I recall being on a diversity call and the topic of toxic masculinity came up, and the examples given were ridiculous. Now, this is when toxic masculinity was a new topic and just starting to make its way around. And, basically it was interesting. The examples given were pretty typical for men wanting to be the protector and the problem solver, right? There's, in my opinion, nothing wrong like that. We're not genderless. Men and women are different for a reason. So after that call, I disengaged from that employee resource group, that day. ERGs, a lot of companies have them, because I didn't like the direction we were going in, especially with that conversation, basically making men feel badly about themselves. And this behavior negatively impacts office dynamics and puts a great deal of stress on employees. And the target of the canceling in particular is basically making someone brutally aware that they're not welcome. In that case, it was men, right? From there, fruitful work and collaboration become virtually impossible for the affected individual or group of individuals, and they often have no other alternative than to leave their company. And this can have long-lasting effects on the target, particularly when the accusations are exaggerated or unfair. The target finds themselves alone in a hostile environment, though little to no fault of their own, right? And this can dramatically affect their mental health and professional performance. And also, let's not forget about the broader team and company is likely to only hear one side of the story, which makes it very difficult to clear the air unless the instigator publicly acknowledges the situation, or if the situation is resolved through established channels. But that doesn't always happen. So, Ron, take us outside of the quintessential office. What does cancel culture look like in, let's say, law enforcement or your background?
Yeah, I definitely want to get to that because that became extremely stressful for me. You had the George Floyd incident, the Michael Brown. There was a lot of things going on, and I get it. They were hot buttons. I condemned a lot of behavior. But just to go back before we move on, I heard the term mansplaining, and there's all these new terms, but it's the first time in my life, the past 4 or 5 years, I have actually felt animosity toward me. I've been on an airplane, and there was a woman trying to get her suitcase out of the overhead luggage, and she kept struggling. She's holding everybody up. I just reached up and pulled it out. Instead of saying thank you, she gave me a dirty look.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I really wanted to flex and go, I know everybody needs a little masculinity sometimes. That's what I wanted to say. But you're right. There's a lot of new terms, and they take on a life of their own. This toxic masculinity. The problem with any of this is there's some great men and there's some turds. And when you begin to use toxic masculinity, you're just brushing a whole group of people like any other thing you would do with any race or a gender. And Kristin, I wanted to say this so I won't forget, but I don't even know if you remember this, but you and I had some conversations preparing to do this podcast. And I literally said, "Are you easily offended?" And it was really funny because you go, nothing offends me. And I
Yeah.
was thinking, we'll see about that. But I just think about how much fun, like if I was doing something, like when you get to know someone, or even if you don't, if you do something that is disrespectful, you can address that. But it
Right.
saddens me. Think about how much fun you and I do making this podcast, and people don't get to
Right.
experience that because they're looking to be offended, and it just
Right.
really saddens me.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so you mentioned law enforcement, and
Mm-hmm.
this began to open my eyes. Number one, and I'm not saying this because I have to. I worked in law enforcement. There's always a bad egg. I've never worked
Yeah.
in any industry there's not. There's people that are young, they get a gun and a badge, and they feel like they're, God's gift to the earth. They usually mature, they
Mm-hmm.
usually season, and the key is getting a mentor around them, and I promote
Right.
that a lot. Our colleague Ross Swope has a great book called uh, Ethical Policing,
Mm-hmm.
and on Amazon. But the most, and I mean, I know so many police officers, most of them would risk their lives for anybody, and
Mm.
they do it. And
Right.
it's one of the few jobs when you put your uniform on. I used to do it, and you really don't know what you're going to face. You try not to think about,
Right.
is something going to happen that puts my life in danger today? But it's a reality. And certainly my
Yeah.
life was placed in danger. And it was a whole different world. I remember the first time I came home, and I honestly did. I go, what in the hell was I thinking? Like, is this what
Mm.
I want to do? Because it was
Right.
it was very serious. It's all fun and games until you actually live that.
Oh,
So
yeah.
what happened is I had someone who lived near Ferguson, Missouri, who was high up in, let's just say, law enforcement. And I was hearing what other people were hearing. This cop, shot this guy. And
Mm-hmm.
again, I must preface this. I'm a factual person. If the cop had done it, I don't care if I wore a uniform, if I'm federal law enforcement, I'm going to say that cop needs to go to prison. That's
Right.
how I roll. But this person said, no, I know the police chief. Michael Brown jumped in the car, tried to take this guy's gun. The statements, none of them match. This is a farce. So, anyway,
Mm-hmm.
I knew that, but I was very hesitant of what I could say because people were so charged up about this. And
Right.
can you imagine early on if I'd have said, no, the guy, and I don't think anybody deserves to get shot,
Oh,
but I'm saying I was
yeah.
not in a position where I could say, no, this guy tried to take his gun away, and there is no such
Right.
thing as hands up, don't shoot. That never happened. That was stated by someone who couldn't even hear what was going on. So
Yeah.
the,
You would have been canceled.
I would have been. I may still get canceled for saying it right now, but I'm telling you, I had the inside information from legitimate people.
And that's August of 14.
Yeah, yeah. And it was
Okay.
ironic that I happened to be friends. As a matter of fact, this same person we talked 2 weeks ago, we hadn't talked in a while, the person who
Mm.
knew the inside of this case.
Right.
But knowing that and then watching the news media report this and listening to what people said, I'm like, oh my gosh. And this is before, like you said, this is before the big cancellation stuff. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, we're living in an alternate universe. They're not trying to find the
Mm-hmm.
truth. They're not trying to even see what this poor police officer has to say. And you know what happened,
Yeah.
Kristin? Even though, yes, they finally found out that the people who gave statements, they all made up their own statement. They didn't match.
Mm.
And the case was ultimately thrown out. We know the story. Did you
Yeah.
know that officer had to leave being a cop and he loved being a police officer? He had to move away. His whole family
Mm.
was threatened. It changed his whole life because of misinformation and putting on a uniform and risking your job. A lot of people go, "Oh,
Wow.
it's easy for you to say you were in law enforcement your whole career." No, I'm factual. And if
Yeah.
that had happened the opposite way, I'd still be having a conversation on this mic saying that police officer
Mm-hmm.
deserved what he got.
Right. Right.
But I did
Exactly.
start to realize, boy, we better do a better job of showing positive things because there's an alternate universe and it's aligned against police officers.
Right. Absolutely is. And, think about, and that's 2014. Fast forward to, 2020 after George Floyd, then we see that all cops are bastards, ACAB. I don't know about there. It sure got spray painted everywhere here in Portland, Seattle. It's all over California still. Portland's actually looking to clean up the graffiti. They're going to pay millions to do it for it to just be done again because they don't have laws in place. Anyhow, but that was a whole thing. So every police officer became a bad bastard, right? Basically. And even I had to unjoin the moms group here in my local area. And I'm outside of Portland, but I used to be in the moms group and it was wonderful. And people kept it focused on being a mom. And they got very political and speaking very poorly about law enforcement. And so I had to, unjoin that. So there's just all sorts of movements out there where everyone gets painted with one brush. I mean, think about it in banking. I used to have you remember Occupy Wall Street?
Oh, yeah.
I worked for Bank of America during that time. And again, I'm in a suburb. And the branch that I managed for 6 years, we had groups of protesters, but we had one person who was dedicated to protesting right outside my door for months and months. And because of Occupy Wall Street, decisions made in New York, right? Or Charlotte or wherever it was made, but he's coming to my location. So
By the way,
everyone gets impacted.
By the way, I watched a reporter go out on Occupy Wall Street. They were interviewing, they interviewed like 12 people. None of them knew what it meant, but boy, they were protesting.
Exactly. Oh my gosh.
And I worked in DC, so there's protests. I remember going for my morning run and I would run through the protesters and I'd always try to see the signs like, what are we protesting today? Just to make sure,
Oh my gosh. I know. It's out of control. Yeah. They don't know. Talk about mob mentality. You mentioned that earlier. That's what we're seeing here. And that group think. So we really need people to get away from that. So I'm really gonna go there right now with cancel culture. Let's talk about canceling and marginalizing whole groups of people. The unvaccinated is a perfect example. From 2020 to 2023, I don't hear it so much this year, the level of psychological warfare that the unvaccinated underwent is like nothing seen since Hitler. The unvaccinated were barred from restaurants, medical facilities, care homes, family events, fired from jobs, harassed, belittled, demeaned, couldn't travel abroad, were denied liver transplants, heart transplants, any type of transplant, and the list goes on. And just this week, a Canadian elected official, this is the first elected official to publicly apologize to the unvaccinated. But at this point, the damage is already done.
Yeah, it is. And I used to think America was so powerful until I saw how COVID put us on our knees, or we allowed it to put us on our knees. But yes, I literally have some friends there. One of their mother told them, if I could catch you all asleep, I would vaccinate your children myself. And the facts show that children have a great immunity, but we threw facts out the window. And Kristin, since my gosh, we've already gone there. We're probably going to get canceled. So let's go out with a bang. What I'm seeing now too is mind-boggling to me, and that is the prejudice against the Jews. And it is really disheartening to me, but let me lay a foundation. Please don't turn off the radio if you're listening and you're already pissed off at us. Let us make you a little more angry. No, let me explain something. So here's the thing about Americans. There's almost no one, if you get in the trenches, like your life is in danger. Can you imagine being in those buildings on 9/11? People were trying to help each other. They didn't care who your background was.
Right.
And the problem is we've lived this leisurely life for a long time. It's been the greatest period of prosperity. We have healthcare, and we can usually, go buy food if we need to. You always have pockets of poverty, but I'm saying in general, America's been on a roll. So almost every civilization, we get spoiled, and then we start to look for things that are wrong, and we make that, worse and worse. So when you actually see what happened in the Hamas attack on the Jews. It was, and I've seen a lot, Kristin, it was the most barbaric attack I've ever seen. I've seen the Jewish, when they were put in the concentration camps and then gassed, which is horrible. But this was, in pockets, this was worse. This was worse, burning a baby in its crib, things like that. So I won't be detailed, but you could never justify ever doing another group of people that way. And because we've been in this period of prosperity and we haven't seen anything bad, we don't understand what's going on. But there are nations, like you said earlier, they're not only celebrating the divisiveness in America, there are nations plotting to destroy America. We are the enemy. And part of that is because we've aligned with Israel. Now, think about this. Israel is the only democracy, the true democracy in the Middle East. They allow women to have rights. A lot of the other countries do not. A few do, but not to the level of Israel. So we actually have a democracy, and this is outside of the religious implications that people talk about, but we have a country that promotes democracy in the Middle East, and we may actually need that country in the near future because of the countries that hate us. Have people forgotten that they burn American flags in Iran, and they do all of these things? Death to Israel,
death to America.
So I'm afraid that this group, not only are they making themselves miserable, one day they're going to wake up and go, uh-oh, what have we done? What have we done? And listen, my heart bleeds for people who are being killed in Gaza, innocent people. But there's a saying, unless you kill the head of the snake will continue. And sometimes we have to look down the road. But I just hate that this has divided our country. But you would think of any people that have been persecuted in the world, especially during Nazi Germany, that people would be bending over backwards to protect the Jewish race. And I am afraid that a lot of the people that are protesting just don't know the truth. And by the way, Kristin, I made two posts on this. I think you know it. I didn't tell anyone else, but I'd never gotten death threats. And I didn't know that Instagram, that you can click and see, like it said that I was getting threats. It told me that.
Oh, interesting.
But when I was able to read, I don't know, it was a bunch, but the ones I read were really bad. And I ended up pulling those posts down. I'm just going to be honest with you, because I was concerned for my family, not me. But this,
and that's because you posted like a pro-Israel post.
Basically, you could say.
And so you received
again, it was pretty factual. I'm a factual guy. I wasn't. I did say this was barbaric, but I explained why we need Israel and why we're aligned. And you don't go there. Trust me. All right. Enough of that.
No, it's wild though, the polarization that we're seeing. I mean, not only are we politically divided, right? Conservative, liberal, but now I'm seeing even within the conservative group, they're very divided now on where the support's going. I know a lot of people are frustrated that we keep spending money on wars that aren't ours. And I think that for a lot of the people that follow me, that's where their frustration is that we're doling out money that we don't have, right?
If we had it, I would be a little more comfortable.
I know. It's like, we're in debt to China. I'm like, we're in debt to our eyeballs. So anyhow, so that's that. But, just yesterday on that topic, I saw a Jewish college professor be denied access into the university he teaches at. So it's like we're starting to see that, and it wasn't for any real reason that I could find. So this is history repeating itself. And I hope folks are paying attention and looking for the truth and not just relying on feelings to get through it. All right. So we're going to pivot here. And, there's always going to be some form of discrimination happening around the world. But we're going to provide you with simple steps to avoid being canceled at work. We're going to bring it back full circle here. And you want to avoid being canceled at work for many reasons. Ron and I just both talked about we were not divisive in the workplace. We were professional, right? We were able to have that separation. That is very important. You want to, why don't we rotate through these?
Yeah, because
Keep it
we're
spicy.
getting a little long.
Yeah, we are getting a little long on this one. We're like long form on this one. So you want to be mindful of your words and actions. This is pretty straightforward, but not enough people do this. Think before you speak or act, especially on sensitive topics. Consider the potential impact of your words or behaviors on others. And you want to aim to communicate respectfully and inclusively.
Does that include the keyboard warriors?
In the workplace. This is in the workplace. So I don't know if we're going to get through to them with this piece.
I love the keyboard warriors.
Yeah.
This is what I've been saying the whole time. Educate yourself, stay informed. And I'm going to be honest with you. If you watch any of the major news networks, they are paid to show you the worst of the worst. And there is some bias both ways. Try to get some independent sources. Make sure you're educated before you become a keyboard warrior.
Yeah, exactly. Or just a couch warrior, right?
Yeah.
Is sit there and scream at your TV and do nothing else, really. You want to listen and learn, be open to feedback from colleagues and willing to listen to perspectives that may differ from your own. That one's a tough one for a lot of people. Take constructive criticism seriously and use it as an opportunity for personal growth and reflection.
Yeah, and another time we'll talk about it, Kristin, but I grew up with believing wholeheartedly in one political party. And I still consider myself independent, but I switched because I started looking at truth and I'm like, uh-oh. So at least I did see truth and I responded. At work, though, respect boundaries, personal boundaries, and avoid engaging in behavior that could be perceived as harassment or discrimination. Be mindful of power dynamics and ensure that your interactions with colleagues are always appropriate and professional. Again, I basically I had people like if we would go over in DC, we'd go over to Thunder Grill after work. I would have people start to bring up politics and I would do my best to just kind of shut it down because most people, I'm going to be honest with you, unless someone comes to you and they're asking your opinion, most people either want to just argue or you're going to get out of hand and nothing's going to be resolved. They've already staked their claim, as they say.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I prefer not to have any politics come up in the workplace. And I think people need to be comfortable saying, you know what, I'd rather not have this conversation, right? Save it for your kitchen table. All right, so you want to promote inclusivity. I'm a big includer. I've talked about this on previous podcast episodes that we used to, after a meeting or something, all the managers, we would go out for a drink. And a few times, someone that maybe wasn't liked by everybody, my friends would get irritated with me for inviting and including everybody, right? Like, why'd you invite them? And I'm like, no, you think I am not going to exclude somebody and make them feel bad about themselves. That's not what I'm about. So that's important. You want to take proactive steps to create that inclusive and welcoming work environment. That I can't say that enough.
This next one, I think, is a slippery slope, but in work, apologize and take responsibility. If you make a mistake or inadvertently offend someone, apologize sincerely, take responsibility for your actions, demonstrate a willingness to learn from your mistakes. Now, I believe that, but I'm saying in a lot of the woke mob, when people apologize, it helps nothing. And plus, if you believe what you said, if it's a value, you owe no one an apology. But in a work situation, like if you accidentally said something through, like you're culturally ignorant or something like that, yes, apologize.
Right. And I think that's where this is coming from. But yeah, I mean, if it's something that was not offensive, but somebody was offended by it, that's when you can take a second and say, okay, I don't know if this actually warrants an apology, right?
Yeah.
So be authentic. Authenticity and transparency can help build trust and credibility. And that's so important. I remember this gal I went to high school with during the BLM rioting. She was very active on social media and she was filming herself going down and doing the BLM protesting in Portland. And she had questioned something I had posted. And she goes, she was basically didn't like that I was anti, whatever she was into. And I said, oh, this doesn't, just because I feel one way and you feel another doesn't mean we don't have the common ground. She goes, I know your heart, Kristin. And so I think that's really cool, because if you're authentic and transparent, that longevity can carry you through a tricky situation like what I went through with her, and we're just fine today.
I've got a similar situation, similar story. People need to understand it's fun to be a victim. It feels good. And I remember during the BLM riots, there was a kid who was completely spoiled, wealthy, and is down there, marching and making all these statements. And I thought, you haven't suffered a day in your life, really?
Yeah.
The next is seek support. If you're unsure about how to navigate a particular situation or topic, seek guidance from trusted colleagues, mentors, or HR professionals. There's our plug for HR.
Donna. I know. I was like, is your friend
Donna? We gave you a plug.
Hi, Donna.
She still doesn't like you, Kristin, but she said,
okay,
but she's
that's
open
all right.
to. She's open when you come to the big conference we're going to announce later. She's open to, give you a shot.
Oh my gosh!
I have
hilarious.
found, Kristin, and you probably have too, if someone is of a different cultural background, race, most people that I've seen are willing to, if you ask them, you shouldn't ask stupid questions, but I'm saying, asking one time, I told you we wanted to do a siesta. Some people requested. So I went to a couple of Hispanic employees that said, is this okay? And they're like, yes, we love it. It's that kind of thing. People are kind of open if they know, as your friend said, your heart.
Right. Exactly. It has to come from the right place. Ron, are you going to bring us home with a little woke terminology?
Well, just a few things that you might hear, but I want to bring us home with something positive. But BIPOC or BAME, and that's Black, Asian, and minority ethnic, basically means non-white. So when you hear that is a code. BOPO is shortly for body positivity. So if you definitely don't want to say someone's overweight, you will be in trouble with the BOPO.
You knew I was going to laugh on that one.
This is when a man takes a woman's idea and soaks up all the glory for it, which is what I do.
Legit.
That's what I do all the time with Kristin.
Wait, is this real? Bro-appropriate? That's a real.
It supposedly is. Cis, this is derived from the Latin meaning on the side of, which is the opposite of the prefix trans and means across from. So I will tell you something. Early on, Kristin, I'm on a podcast, and so they said, Ron, as a cis male,
oh my gosh,
what would you do? Fortunately, I kind of figured out what they meant, but I said, are they saying a sissy? What are they calling me here? And I was able to answer, but I did not like being called a cis male. But I guess if you're going to go by the Latin term, I could be called worse. Cultural appropriation. And this is something that I do find bewildering, because we don't even know throughout time where a lot of things came from. But one of the biggest ones that stood out is Justin Bieber wore the dreads. And the world exploded. People were saying he appropriated a culture. Then it was found out the Dutch actually originated those, but that didn't matter. So anyway, greenwash. And this is when a company goes out of its way to convince you that it's more environmentally friendly than it really is. And there's been a bunch of companies that got caught up in that area because they get more government fund. There's all kinds of good things happen if you greenwash. So this is what I want to say at the end. If you've stuck with us, you're brave, number one. Number two, if this is our last episode, we love you. And number three, if you do know of people, try to have reasonable conversations. This bothers me. I watched, and one of your friends was on this, Kristin, the Patriot Barbie was on this. But they have these discussions. It's a podcast. And this poor girl, she had piercings and green hair, tattoos all over her face and stuff. And it was one of those times when my heart bled for her. And I realized what makes us angry sometimes are just people hurting. And maybe you're not going to affect a mob, But if you pull someone off to the side, or you have an opportunity and you can find out what the root cause is and see where that hurt's coming from, a lot of times you can reach these people. Some people are just crying
Yeah.
out. And as human beings, sometimes we need to take a different approach, because a lot of people do piss me off. I have to admit it. But then when I've had some heart to hearts, I've realized that this person's just been abused. So they've been
Yeah.
abused by some toxic male, and now every male is toxic. So I'm saying, let's treat each other like human beings. Let's give each other the benefit of the doubt. Someone might accidentally misgender you or misappropriate, but give people the benefit of the doubt. Have a conversation. Let the blood pressure come down a little bit. But here's the last thing I want to say. Don't leave this earth knowing that you made yourself miserable and those around you miserable. Do something good for somebody. Make people smile and try to enjoy your life, because God knows it's short. And that's all I've got, Kristin.
No, I love it. And that's perfect for us to end on. And I think this topic was a great pick, because so many people are dealing with it in work, in the workplace, and outside of the workplace. And it's good that we dive in and really shed some light on an important topic. And Ron, I appreciate you being brave and going there with it.
Well, you're the brave one. I was just, following your coattails.
You're getting there.
All right, everybody. Be the leader you're meant to be.
We'll see you next week, potentially.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristin for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.